A history long forgotten will be unearthed. Will their stories endure? Avail takes a moment from her hot kitchen, stepping out into the main room. The bustling room full of lively men and women. A small dwarf stands on a table, screaming at an orc who is looking like he's about to cry. The little dwarf's beard vibrating with his exuberant display of passionate anger, his voice rising and causing laughter from hearty men around him. The more fragile orc man turns and runs for the door, the wooden door slamming behind him, cutting off his loud sobs. Gradford! Avail screams loudly. The diners of the bar and the barmaiden all hush. The room itself coiling its noise as the stocky woman charges through the crowd. Weaving her way around the tables, hushed oohs and ahs following behind her.
Just hush your knockers and go fill me a pint, you brood.
The red-faced dwarven man says as Avail approaches, the girl's face getting increasingly irritated as she gets to standing in front of him. Even on the table, the dwarf is about 5 inches shorter than her, his drunken eyes staring at her with a cocky piss smile.
First of all,
Avail grabs the dwarf by his beard, pulling him up and off the table, then tossing his short posterior onto the ground.
you don't stand on a lady's table.
She walks over to him, a drunken dwarf a mess on the ground, a little bit of vomit slipping from his mouth as he tries to pull himself up.
Why, you...
The dwarf can't utter another word, as a woman's foot is pressing into his gut, causing vomit to flow freely from his mouth onto the floor. Then she starts to slide him through it, her eyes a violent gaze as she uses the rodent man to wipe up his own vomit.
Girl, get back to the wash bucket and mop.
She screams to her maid that is standing with a tray pressed to her breast, the young girl nodding violently as she turns to run into the kitchen.
Wayfairer's Tavern is for all to come and enjoy a nice brew or stew. If you disrupt my peace, my home, I will never let you get a pint here again.
She spits the words into the room, glaring at the eyes of each man sitting there. The atmosphere that was jolly and drunk, now one of sober seriousness, fear even.
Understand?
Gidren's assignment. Dense air slowly blew through the underbrush as the light of the night star crept through the treetops. Muted vibrations could be felt through the false serenity of the forest. Diminutive ponds added their high-pitched echoes to the night as the last drops of rain disturbed their surfaces. Various distorted noises could be heard from the animals who managed to survive in such an unforgiving place. Vibrato croaks and coordinated chirps creating a bizarre backdrop to the seemingly lifeless surroundings. Groans from the twisted trees reverberated throughout the forest as their highest branches and leaves began to intertwine with each other in the canopy. The chorus of the forest melded together as the light from the night star began to be blocked out from the world below. Within minutes, the canopy shielded the ground completely from the outside world, and the environment below began to change drastically. Slithering tendrils underneath the ground began to illuminate with a bright blue that shined like a star made of pure sapphire. Throughout the forest they ran like a network of veins. The forest had a new urgency about it. Colorless insects unraveled themselves from the branches as they formed their bodies into waiting traps for an animal that might be so unfortunate as to fall prey to it. Beings seemingly made up of an illuminated jelly lifted themselves off the ground where they had been disguised as puddles. Where this ecosystem thrived was at night. However, tonight's ritual was far more important for one individual. While the forest had started its procedures, Goodrem had finished recording his observations in his journal. He tucked it away comfortably in his shirt pocket and tapped his chest 3 times. Goodrem used to be a man of low stature. When the gateways had been used to save the races, he had not been fortunate enough to be spared from the corruption of this world. His right arm was utterly mangled by forces far beyond that of any creature. His flesh on his arm appeared to have been turned into a tight mucus against his muscles that had been decaying over the passing years. His face had been contorted by the corruption. The bones of his jaw had long been dissolved and replaced with small vents that resembled the gills of a fish. The right half of his face had been turned a strange mint green, and his right eye was bright yellow with a vertical pupil that spanned its entirety. Both of his feet had been mutated into toe pads that resembled that of a tree frog. While he may have been a perversion of his former self, he had survived and become better from it. He gathered up his small pack, made of a strange leaf-like material, as he grasped a nearby tree with his right arm. The mucus on his arm reached out to the tree at his touch. Goodrem appeared deep in thought as his mind connected to the magic of the forest. His vision shot through the forest as he searched for his prey. A twisted smile stretched across his lips as he had found his reason for being here. Finally, after 2 years in the forest, he had found some luck. He quickly withdrew his arm from the tree and began breathing heavily. He had never been good with magic before his corruption, but he knew that prolonged exposure to such strong vessels of power could quickly overtake him. He calmed himself and breathed out through the slits in his neck. A few puffs of blue light exhausted themselves from his neck. After gathering himself, he headed towards the direction of his prey with newfound vigor that he had not had since entering the forest. As he neared the traveling party, he climbed up into the twisted canopy right below the shield it had created from the sky. His toes stuck into the branches, allowing him free movement of his upper body. He retrieved a small wooden instrument from his pocket and turned it over in his left hand. It was a relic from a long past time that had been given to him from his mother. She had always played soothing melodies on their farm. The memory was comforting to Goodrem, but he knew this was not the time for distraction. He had meticulously planned for this moment since his assignment here. He focused his attention back towards the clearing below. While he hung from the branch, his right arm aimlessly reached towards one of the colorless insects and scooped it into Goodrem's mouth. He swallowed down the meal and patiently waited. 2 hunched figures labored into the clearing below. Both were sheathed in a zoetic mass of bubbling membrane. Their outlines shook against the bright light underneath them. Through the opening of their membranes protruded long necks that moved with the fluidity of a snake about to strike. Their faces had long vertical slits for their piercing neon blue eyes. At the middle of their face were long snouts with small ridges that led down to their noses. Goodrem had studied some of the tunnels created by these creatures, but had never seen one alive or above ground. The 2 figures gargled an amalgamation of hisses and breathless snaps. Goodrem quickly wrote in his journal of the strange observation. He knew this had to be their means of communication, but he had no way of understanding them. His interest was short-lived as a 3rd figure appeared from the opposite side of the clearing. A tall, slender elf walked out of the underbrush towards the 2 creatures. Goodrem's mouth was agape. The elf seemed clear of corruption. His pale skin and flowing appearance was in stark contrast to the mutation around him. He strode up to the creatures with a purpose that imposed his importance. With a flick of a wrist, he retrieved a book from underneath his robes. After a short incantation, he began to speak to the creatures. His voice carried as he appeared to have no fear of being overheard. Confidence exuberated from his pure being. While Goodrem had never learned the language of the Empyrean elves when he was younger, time had forced him to become acquainted with such tongues.
The forest emanates with a power I have not felt since its inception. I take it Sakir has been able to utilize my gift?
The elf inquired. The creatures spoke in unison with a voice that was obviously altered.
He has performed as you had instructed.
Their voices were projected from the book in the elf's hand. With each syllable, the book shined for an instant.
He thinks that soon we will have control over the currents.
The elf smiled brightly at the creatures. The tension between the creatures seemed to fade rapidly as the elf beamed at them.
Magnificent news indeed. I should expect Sakir to be finishing within the coming weeks. You will see me again shortly.
As he finished his veiled threat, he snapped the book closed and stuffed it back under his garments. In one motion, he turned, leaving the clearing. Goodrem hastily tried to connect to the magic veins to watch where the elf had gone. To his dismay, he had disappeared. No trace could be found of his presence anywhere in the surrounding area. Goodrem relinquished his connection to the network and blew out more blue air. Through the shock of seeing the elf, he realized that his mission was now clear. He had been sent here to collect the gift that had been used to harness the forest's power, and he was going to succeed.
Every hour, a myriad of billions of minuscule bacteria, plants, and microscopic animals are born and die. This has always fascinated me. They do not grieve. They do not suffer. They have no awareness, but are very much alive. 1 billion dying is incomparable to a single human's death. However, when everything and everyone around you perishes, sorrow and heartache become finite. Staring in disgust at friends I have known all my life scramble over one another, pushing and shoving, doing whatever it takes to make it to the gate. Some, who had not lost all humanity, fell behind. The last memory I have of the old world are screams of the deceased echoing through my ears. Turning back only to see the relentless darkness drowning the place I had called home for so long. The apocalypse, the unstoppable tide, the wrath of gods. That is what the doomsayers called it. Religious zealots squabbling over which god had forsaken us this week, and how the heaven we stumbled upon is only a temporary sanctuary. Meanwhile, the rest go back to their regular lives as though nothing has happened, not realizing their hubris was their own undoing, and if ignored, surely will lead to the same fate as before. Not even days has passed since the very thing that separated us from the corruption was abandoned. It is time they were reminded of the power of grief.
Dear Diary, I did not deserve that pleasure. A thrill that tingled the tips of my toes to depths of my soul. His touch was as gentle as a butterfly floating careless through the wind. His grip was as firm as a warrior clinging to the steel in his axe. His words were as chilled as a calm lake on a windless night. His body was as steamy as a pool of water waiting about fiery lava rocks. Forgotten are the whispers that he floated through my ears. My only cherished memory is the unbuckling of his plate mail armor, followed by the slow undoing of my lavender pink dress.
Darkness. Looking into the darkness, the remnants of a world once lush and green. Gone are fertile valleys, even the farms and fields. The skeletons of vast cities are all that seem to remain. Where have all the forests gone? Could man have destroyed them all? Questions without answers, though conclusions could be drawn. Now all that's left is the darkness in a world that once was green.